You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Delavan, and with us, as always, is our producer, Chelsea Steer. Hey, Chelsea.
Hey, Sarah. We have a really good Baba Yacht episode coming up today, but I want to start things off talking about the episode that we actually just came out with a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
2 weeks ago, we released an episode where you announced the coming of the Good Food CFO software. I have to say that since then, it has been a whirlwind of excitement, of support, of, talking with like our peers and our community, and a lot of events since then.
Yeah.
So I want to remind everyone listening, or tell you if you're listening and you're not on our mailing list, maybe you don't know this, but we've been doing previews of the software for our members on Substack.
Yeah.
And that has been really exciting because I know that the feedback that we've gotten so far has been basically everything that we wanted to hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Better than we could have even imagined.
Yeah. And to give a sense of like what the like preview is essentially you get to see what the software looks like. You get to see all of the components of the software. So we're not walking through this is exactly how you use it, but more so this is what it does. And this is what you're going to be able to do and to see and to achieve with this financial strategy software. And yeah, I think I keep playing over and over in my head the one bit of feedback we got. And this is not an exact quote, but it was sort of like a wow, 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 wow. You know, this doesn't exist anywhere else. And I've been working with great financial people, you know, over the last few years, but like they don't have anything like this. And it's like, same, right? I consider myself to be a great financial person and I haven't had this either. And I've wanted this and we need this. And that's exactly why we created it. So yeah, all of the feedback we've gotten so far has been amazing. And we want our members and anyone who's interested to come and see the preview, get a taste of what this tool can do, get on our wait list. And the other thing we're doing, in addition to these events, we're gearing up to start doing some free courses, or I'm going to call it like a workshop for our members. And this is to help you make the most of the software. So something we've talked about a number of times here on the podcast. We've done newsletters about it. We've done sort of like virtual workshops, if you will, where like we would drip, you know, step-by-step content weekly in our newsletters. But we're going to do it in real life. That is customizing your profit and loss statement. The more customized you have your P&L to bring into the software, the more powerful outcomes you can create within the software. So we want everybody to be like ready to go when this launches in a couple of weeks. So we're offering this, again, totally free course for our members. I think we're going to offer it 2 or 3 times to try to hit everybody's schedule and when it's best for them. That'll be inside the membership on Substack. You can see all of those dates. We'll definitely let you know in the newsletter as well. And I'm excited to do this course live with folks for the first time after all of these years of talking about it, communicating about it, answering questions about it. We'll get to do it live. People can bring their P&Ls, you know, to the course. We're going to look at it in real time. It's going to be really exciting.
Okay, great. That was going to be my question is like, should members be bringing their P&L? Like, is it going to be that kind of a workshop where you're just going to talk through it and answer questions and look at things? And
yeah, well, basically we'll give you here's the idea, right? We want the revenue section of our P&L to be separated by sales channel, for example. And then we're going to walk through the why and the how, and then we'll look at examples. So if you're like, okay, Sarah, here's what mine looks like now. Here are the channels I sell in. Confirm for me, this is how it should be broken down. I can confirm that for you. And then we'll also talk about the next steps to get those changes implemented. It's an easy process, but it's just one where you have to carve out a little bit of time to think through the changes and then communicate them to your bookkeeper or whomever is doing your books for you. So yeah, really interactive, really productive, which is why I think it's more of like a workshop than a course, because we're actually going to be digging in together.
Yeah, doing the work. And then lastly, Sarah, we also have a members only episode coming up. If you've been listening along, we've had a whole series of member only episodes this summer talking about the work that we've been doing behind the scenes. And this one We're going to be actually diving into some real numbers, some investments,
Yeah.
on what it took to bring this software to life.
Yeah, this was a suggestion by a client actually and community member, and he was like, "I think you should do an episode on the investment and the time and what it looks like to build the software." Turns out that he was a like worked in software in a past life
Hmm.
before becoming co-founder of the food business. And I thought, you know what, if you think this is interesting, I'm sure that other people will find it interesting as well. And I've learned a lot in this process. It keeps kind of blowing my mind every time I think about the fact that I've gone from consultant to tech founder. Like, I have these now sort of two titles, and there's so much I've learned as a tech founder in terms of like what you can do, how much it costs to do certain things, how you have to sort of tiptoe into building that ultimate tool that you want to build, and figuring out how do we make something that is going to be really impactful from day one while staying in budget
Yeah.
and being smart about how we build. It's very aligned with how we talk about building food businesses, but just sort of in another industry, if you will, right?
Yeah. Or with another perspective.
Yeah. And so I thought, you know what, if, as always, if one person is interested in it, there's probably a couple other people who were interested as well. So we're going to dive into that and just kind of share a little bit more of what it has looked like from the financial side and just like the work side of building software for those who are interested.
Yeah. And so all of that exciting stuff is going to be happening in our membership, which you can learn more about if you want by going to our website, thegoodfoodcfo.com, and clicking on membership. Okay. Now, Sarah, I teased that this was a Bobby Yacht episode.
Yep.
And today we are going to get to hear your conversation with Kartik Das, the founder of and snack maker at Doosra.
I love following Kartik's Instagrams. They just recently made like over 400 pounds of Doosra
Oh my
for
gosh.
food service. It's really fun. You get to see a nice like behind the scenes with him and his team. Yeah, we have sort of a funny meet cute, if you will. I was at Expo West, as many of you may know, earlier this year, and Allie Ball and I sort of ran into each other like moments after I arrived on the expo floor, and she said, "Hey, Kartik from Doosra like wants to meet you. He's at this table. Like, make sure you go by and meet him." I was like, "Okay, great." So it wasn't his table, but he was helping out another brand. And so
Mm.
eventually, over the course of the day, I landed over at the table that he was at, and he was not there.
Oh.
And so I talked to the other founders over there. I said, "Please tell Kartik that I am here, and, you know, I'd love to connect with him." So then we ended up connecting over Instagram, and we had a lovely conversation, just like a getting to know you. And in that conversation, he shared so many insights into how he's building Doosra, and
Mm.
very much like how he's doing it on his own terms and the ways that he's building it. And of course, I'm sitting there and I'm taking it all in. And I said to him, "You have to be on the podcast. I think you're an inspiration to building a business on your own terms." And continually, right? We need founders to hear these different stories. And I think the other really important thing here too is that Kartik is as he calls it, a third culture kid. And he's got backgrounds in India, Singapore, London, and New York. He's worked in banking, logistics, and food, right? He's got many backgrounds, many
Yeah.
experiences, and he's created Doosra as a way of showcasing a lesser known part of Indian food culture. And I think in our conversation, he mentions like everyone knows tikka masala, but
Mm-hmm.
nobody knows these like sweet and savory and, dare I say, a little funky, and I love funky, snack that people in India love. And so that's what he's creating. And so it's almost like extra special because he's bringing something from his heritage. He's bringing something that he loves to eat. He's introducing much of the United States to this food that they're unfamiliar with, and he's doing it on his own terms. And so I just found him to be a really inspiring and interesting founder, and I'm so glad that he agreed to sit down and chat with us and get recorded while doing it.
Yeah. I think on the topic of like introducing these flavors, if you will, right, to the American palate. Because I think that is, you're right, that is what he's doing. One of the things that you guys talked about that I found so interesting was the diversification in his channel strategy, right?
Mhm.
Um, one of the things he specifically talks about is being in corporate pantry sales.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so interesting. I mean, among the like food service and markets and like all the other channels that he's in, but that one really spoke to me because he talked about wanting to find the ways or the channels in which he could get in front of customers, find his customer in a way that is like the lowest risk for the customer.
Yeah. I think you're going to find risk as like a common thread, and him sort of like analyzing the risk, understanding the risk, and then making decisions with that in mind throughout the conversation. And without going into like too much detail and giving too much away here, I think you're going to find it in the channels that he has chosen. I think you're going to find it in the way he prioritizes cash flow and
Mm,
margin. I think you're going to find it in the way that he utilizes his credit cards. I think you're going to find it in the way that he grows his business, right? It's like, it really is a common thread where I think, and I'm just kind of reflecting on this now as you bring this up, Chelsea, where he's saying, okay, how do I do this for Doosra and for our customer in the least expensive, least risky way?
yeah.
And not to say like in the cheapest, but like in the least financially risky way. And how do I test, iterate, prove, and repeat, which I love.
Yeah, it was one of the things I really loved about the conversation, and it does mirror back to the conversation that you had with Eli from Bezzy, which was, and I think he even says it in the episode, the idea of testing and failing when it
Mhm.
won't cost you as much.
Yeah. I think there's so much for founders to take away from my combo with Kartik. I think we are ready to jump right in. What do you think, Chelsea?
Yeah, let's do it. Want to take advantage of all the things we talked about at the beginning of this episode? Then become a Baba Yacht member. When you become a member, you'll unlock access to our software previews, our free webinars in September, and as a Baba Yacht member, you'll also get access to your own members-only podcast link, beta testing the software before it launches, and if you become an annual member, you will receive a 10% discount on all tools and resources. That includes the software and CFO office hours. Become a member now by visiting thegoodfoodcfo.com/Baba Yacht. That's BABOYOT. And now back to the show.
Kartik, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks. So glad to be here.
I'm really excited to learn more about Doosra and your approach to starting and running and growing your business. But before we get into all of the meaty stuff, will you tell our listeners a little bit about your brand?
Yeah. So I run a snack company called Doosra. Now, Doosra in Hindi or Urdu means different or other, and that sort of guides the way we approach Indian food. Right. We make snacks that are a little crispy, a little crunchy, a little savory, a little salty. And it's a very big part of South Asian cuisine in general. If you come into somebody's house, they're offering usually something to drink and a little salty snack. And those drinks are usually chai, and chai's made it to every shelf and every pantry across the country. But the snacks haven't made it. I think of chai as Batman, and the snack as Robin. You want to bring Robin to the game. So that's what we do. I'm a third culture kid, and so my lived experience is through a range of different food cultures, a range of different flavors. So Doosra is, in its essence, an Indian snack company, but you will find elements in our snacks that are quite different. Hence the name Doosra.
Yeah, I love that. I love to hear the background of the name and the why of a brand. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Give us a little bit of insight into where you are as a brand right now in terms of, how many stores you're in, how you're selling your product, like, so what channels you're in, and a little bit of that kind of info.
Sure. So when I started this business, I had an idea that food margins weren't great, but I don't think I really understood the intricacies of the way the food system is built here. But I knew that in order to build there's two real ways we can approach it, right? One is dive all into one channel, or the second is to build three or four different avenues for us to make money and to make sales. And because we've got a product that's quite differentiated that requires a lot of explanation, it could fit into your life quite easily. But if you don't know what the flavors are, you're going to be hesitant. So we decided to do a few things. We've got an independent store channel, so we're in just under 50 stores, I believe. And they change up and down, here and there. We've got a little bit of direct to consumer. We do a decent amount of like conventions and markets. We started on farmers markets, but now we like to do larger buying conventions. And then we're standing up a small food service arm where we're selling, our snacks in 4-pound bulk bags to some bars who have it on their bar menu, some restaurants who are having on their dessert menu. And now we're working on the corporate pantry side of things, to get to some larger tech organizations to be the snacks of choice in those
Yeah.
pantries.
So it sounds like these decisions for which channels to launch in and to grow into is sort of a mix of like, how can we best communicate and help the potential customer know what this product is and how it can fit into their life, their restaurant, their company, but also margins and choosing
Yeah,
wisely.
exactly, right. You're trying to have something that's a little blended, right? But think of it from your perspective. If you were offered something that's a little different, something that's a little new, naturally there's a bit of risk aversiveness to try a product for the first time and spend cash for the first time, right? So we're trying to find spots where you can try it with the lowest amount of risk, and understand what you're about to get. And then we believe strongly enough in our product that if we're for you, that conversion is quite high.
Mm-hmm.
But we'd rather do that in places where, if I'm offering you a sample with a glass of wine at a happy hour, you're like, well, what's the worst that can happen? I'm gonna try a couple of bits, and then if I like it, great. So we're trying to find different ways to do that. So that corporate pantry element, where most of those folks get those snacks for free, right? That's no aversion to trial. You can always look at something else if you don't like it, and so that's what we're trying to do. But like you said, from a margin perspective, in order to get into traditional retail here, as you've mentioned the podcast quite a bit, there's a decent amount of capital required to play in those spaces. And we know at some point we'd like to pursue that, but we'd like to build our own cash buffer before we go there. And having cash up front at markets and events with larger margins, and with the corporate food service side of things, again, you're moving a decent amount of product. There's inventory turnover in a good way, and that's cash coming in. So it's a bit of both.
Yeah. I love when founders share the very strategic elements of how they're choosing their customers and their channels. Is I think sometimes, especially early days and sort of from the outside of the industry, there's a mindset or an understanding that like there's one way to grow in food, right? And that's get into big retail. And this is the way I'm making air quotes for those who aren't watching on YouTube. Like this is the way it's done. And you know what I mean? And so I think, it's so awesome to hear. And there's several, founders who've come on the show at this point and said, we're really thinking about this strategically. And, I'm really, pinpointing on something you just said, which is like cash is important. And we want to have a cash cushion. We want to have a bit of a cash runway. We don't want to, and I'm paraphrasing, jump into a channel where it's going to be very cash intensive and we don't have the cash, or it's not generating cash for us in, a certain time frame.
Yeah, and I think something that resonated when I first started listening to you. So I'm going to shout out to Ash Ganapati Raju from Ojaswa, who actually brought me to the Good Food Safer podcast a while back. I think the focus in the industry here is, at least the focus for me is rather, at the end of the day, I'm building a business, right? And so there are elements that go into that. And, you go back to your old school, like MBA intro classes, like there are 4 different types of product lines, right? Like one is your cash cow and you've got things like that. And so things that someone like me has to consider is that, okay, are there avenues or different types of sale channels that might not be sexy, that might not be what CPG media or folks who are talking about what's on trend value, but it allows me to then build my business in a way that I think will make sense. And I used to work in finance a long time ago, and one of these companies, I don't know what I don't know, is like a very important way of approaching anything.
Yeah.
And so I can only operate in the way that I know, and I'm learning things, but some of those pathways have a lot of prerequisites for you to follow down that path that we're
Yeah.
just not equipped with yet. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I, there's two topics that I want to talk about. I don't know which avenue to go down first. I'm
Let's
going to
go.
go first with like your growth philosophy, because I
Sure.
know that you took some time to validate market demand for your product. And I want to talk about that approach and what you call repeatable, methodical growth versus rapid expansion. So, can you share a little bit about sort of that testing period and then what you mean by repeatable, methodical growth?
Sure. I mean, to be completely honest, I think we're still testing, and we're going to be continually testing. But when I started the business, right, I literally bought craft bags off Amazon, stuck some stickers on it. And I went to a farmer's market to sell because I knew the product tasted good. I needed to know if other folks thought the same and whether they would buy. Right, that was the first step. And so we did that for 3 4 months. People liked the product. They were like, the branding is complete nonsense. I'm like, it's a brown paper bag with some stickers on it. I understand. And so that's when we made the first shift. Right? Our first, the name was different, right? So then we coined the name Doosra because it meant a lot, not just in describing the product, but reflecting me as a founder. And then we said, okay, now we've got a bag that could, stand on a shelf. Let's go to the three different types of markets we think this brand will resonate with, right? And so my hypothesis was we've got first folks who like Indian food, right? And are open to trying a different form factor of Indian food because you see all the chais and the spices and the simmer sauces, but you don't see snacks in outside Indian stores. The second was anybody who's first generation South Asian American, right? So their parents had snack brands that they related to, but they're sort of in a different space. So that was that second group. And the third was, your very classic millennial female from X age to X age, right? So those are the three stores we said, okay, we're going to go pursue. So let's double down. Let's see if that hypothesis is true because I don't have the ability to acquire data. Our direct to consumer presence was a little challenging, and also we've got a chocolate product, so in the summer it's quite difficult to really push that and still make money. And we did that, and we very quickly realized that my highest converting audience was the folks who liked Indian food but didn't live in cities, who lived in suburbs, who couldn't get access to these things on a regular enough basis. I wouldn't have expected that. The people who were buying the most were above 50, right? It was Caucasian women 50 and above who were hosting, who were finding better for you products to use throughout their day, something for breakfast, something for lunch, something for a happy hour. And so okay, it's validating some things there. So we learned a few things. And then we said, let's look for more of those types of stores because we know that if we sample and we talk to that audience, they will continue to buy. And those are the best word of mouth customers because they're often sharing things. So we did that. And then we said, okay, we're also going to double down on this larger Asian American audience because when we sampled with them, it was also resonating, right? So we're in stores like Spicewalla, which resonates to folks who enjoy API products. In New York, we're at Pearl River Mart for folks who are looking for API products. So that doubled down there. So we did this for 2 years, right? Alongside that, we did events, chocolate shows, places where you're doing like beverage sales, like wine and whiskey shows, and where to snack there, right? So things like that. And people found themselves gravitating to us in ways where we didn't even mention Indian. The idea was just flavor, and people enjoyed the flavor. And so now we got through 2 years. People love the product. We exhibited Fancy Food last year, and everybody was like, the distributors, the retailers, the buyers were like, product is great, packaging won't survive on shelf. And I think we kind of knew that we needed to do a version 2, but we didn't want to rush into it. And so we said 2 years, we've learned, let's now change that, right? So 3 weeks ago we exhibited Fancy Food again, and we made the bag smaller. So we said, okay, people want to try this for the first time, but the 6-ounce bag is too much of a price barrier to try for the first time. So let's made it smaller. People walking past the bag have no idea what it is. So we updated our branding, which we invested in, and so far the response has been really, really good. So now we know we can actually try and go sell. So the next stage of growth now is over the next, call it 18 months, right? So the 6 months and all 2026 is to test if more people are going to pick it up without us being there.
Right.
without us being able to tell that story, because now the packaging should tell the story. We've been fortunate enough to get some earned media along the way that should back this up when people go to look for us to validate that purchase when they see us on shelf. And it's going to be the same. We're going to try and avoid any major retail. We're going to double down independence. We're going to build that niche and build these ancillary business, ancillary channels of food service. I kind of I don't like to make the comparison because we're nowhere near capitalized or we're nowhere near as cool as someone like Raza, but suddenly you saw them everywhere and you had no idea what it was as a start,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so for me, it's I want people to see us in places and start getting inquisitive,
Yeah.
and that's what these different channels do for us.
To your point, marketing matters, branding matters, right? And I think that when I think about your brand, I think about longevity. I think about, you know, growth like this, over time. And maybe there'll be a, a bigger curve up at some point, right? Where, I hope you see that. But I think there's a difference between something that becomes, a big trend, right? The risk that has is like, when is the next big olive oil trend going to come, or the next big something that can kind of, wipe that out, versus something like yours, which is, again, going back to repeatable methodical growth. And I think that's, I love this idea of we're testing these things out. I've really become a fan of this idea of like failure is an option, and saying, okay, we're going to test these three markets, these three audiences, these three consumers. I have a hypothesis, right? Having a hypothesis inherently means I'm testing this out to see if I'm wrong
Yep.
or right about my thoughts, right? And there's so much value in that. I think especially in today's world where we as founders are believing that we have to get everything right? Like the first time we do something, it's got to be right. And that's just not realistic, And you're also, I think, working to eliminate the randomness, right? Like there is randomness in someone coming to buy your product every once in a while, right?
Yep.
There is going to be someone who's outside of your quote unquote target audience, or your avatar, who buys your product, right? But
Yep.
maybe that's not the repeatable bit. So really understanding who is my consumer. How do I speak to them? Where do they shop? Where can I find them? And then also understanding, because this is the other thing I'm hearing, understanding the learning curve about your product, and asking yourself the question, and then testing out and hypothesizing the channels in which you can create a low barrier to trial. I just think is really smart. So these are all really, I think, intelligent ways of approaching and hypothesizing about your business to test it, because you can fail a lot like quicker
Yep.
doing this, you know what I mean, and a lot less expensively.
I also think so. When you first asked where we were, I think a lot of times the question is how many stores you're in, right? So
Mm.
we've never gone past 50 stores. We've been doing this for 2 years, and admittedly, we're a very very small business. I think people think we're a lot bigger than we are, and you know, I'll pat myself on the back. We'll move on, right? I know we're small, and so I am very upfront with folks when they say, "Oh, we'd love to see you here," or "You should do this, you should do that." It's like we can't.
Right.
And if we were to go raise a chunk of capital, maybe that's possible. But is that the best use of any of cash in general, regardless of
Mm-hmm.
whose it is? Is that the best use of building a relationship with someone who's going to give you capital, and then you're not able to use it in an effective way, and so that risks gaining more capital down the road?
Yeah.
We still don't know, right, whether this works. But I would rather grow like this, as long as there's a little bit of an incline,
Yeah.
um, knowing that the cost of failure is low,
Mm-hmm.
because I am building this business so that I don't have to work another job in my life, and I can do
Mm-hmm.
this, for as long as I need to. I'm not looking for a crazy exit. I'm not looking to build $100 million company. If in 5 to 7 years we have a $10 million company that we hire 10 people, we can feed them, we can take care of them, and I can live a comfortable enough life. That's great.
Yeah.
And so I also understand that I am privileged to be able to do that because I have I say I have one investor, and that's my wife, right? And I have a 401k. And we're able to do this because we don't have a very fancy lifestyle, but we're able to keep the lights on. We've got food on the table, and I can do this in a slow, steady way where if we get those repeatable systems, where if I get 100 stores that are ordering from me every 2 weeks on a regular enough cadence, I don't need 1,000 stores,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there are folks who've started way after me who are way ahead of me, and it's kudos to them because they're doing incredible stuff. But this is the way that I'm going to do it. And at some point, if we have all those things checked off, then we can take capital and then we can grow in a meaningful way.
Yeah. I'm so like keyed into this idea of repeatable, and I want to just stay on the topic
Yep.
briefly because I'm thinking about, it's the time of year for me and my work where we're looking at, discounts, bundles, promotions for the holidays. We're being strategic, financially about who we can hire and what we can spend, not for the Good Food CFO, but for our clients, right? And that's what we're looking at. We're going to be gearing up for office hours again in September to help, other folks in the industry do this. And as part of the process, right, we're forecasting what do our Q4 sales look like and what do the sales look like, in each channel. And the number of founders that struggle to either make a forecast for October, November, December, or they make a forecast and then they struggle to hit the numbers. It's the majority, right? Those two categories are the majority of folks that we work with. And I think the reason both of those things exist is because they lack that repeatable
Yep.
like sales. They may have had a holiday where, someone came in last year and bought a bunch of product, but they don't have another one of those for
Yep.
this year lined up.
Yeah, I think that's why I say I never talk about store count, because I've got 20 stores that I know are going to keep ordering from me. And those are the relationships I'm building. And so with them, we are constantly figuring out, okay, if we're bringing product in, what is the cadence in which we need to send someone out there to demo? What is the cadence in which we just send them a box of samples and they sample on their own? What is the
Yeah.
cadence in which we can do an event or a collaboration with them so we keep that going? So at that point, I'm not worried, right? So last year, what I did is I looked at all the stores we were in and I looked at the top 15, right? The top 15 stores, because that's kind of where the natural break ended up being
Right.
in volume, and said, okay, these are the only 15 stores that matter to me. The rest, if they order again, that's gravy.
Right.
But if these 15 stores, I need to keep it, I need to grow. Because if I double the revenue we get from these 15 stores, the other 35 don't matter,
Right.
right? And it sounds a little callous to say, but and I will still extend the service to those 35 stores, and as long as they're interested in growing the business, we will do that. But I know these 15 will stick and will grow. And then and if we get into a rhythm over the course of 6 months where I can say, this is a plug and play, I can go to another store the same size and the same demographic and say, we've done it here. So let's try and do the same thing here. And then I can tell them with confidence at the start, we might be selling 2 units a week. But if we keep doing this over the course of 6 months, in month 8 and month 9, we can get to a point where we're selling 10 units a week. And then it makes sense for you and it makes sense for me.
Yeah. This is so powerful. And it's like you said, it's the unsexy work, right? Of like, but it's reviewing, it's note taking, it's understanding that, okay, I believe, again, I'm hypothesizing, if I do a demo right now, this is what the result is going to be. If I, like you said, if I send a package of samples there and they do the sampling, this is what the result is going to be. That's repeatable. It's predictable. And then the confidence that you bring to every new store that you open with, when you say, here's what we're probably going to start, this is what we're going to do, these are the results you could see, here's the data to back that up. They're like, okay, amazing. What an awesome partner you are, number one. And number two, when it comes to forecasting and looking ahead and saying, okay, I want to grow maybe 5% this year. Maybe I want to grow 10% in my revenue this year. What does that equal? That might equal, I'm obviously making up numbers here, that might equal 5 more stores that look just like this 15.
Yep.
Okay, that's doable, right? You can break that down into actionable steps to find those right stores, to get onboarded with those stores, and then to execute on those sales. And I think that is the work of a founder, is to figure out who is your customer? Where are they? And then how do you make this a science as much as you possibly can?
Yes, and I think the the challenge with doing that is keeping your blinders on,
Mm,
right? Because everything else in the industry, if you're plugged into the industry, it's how many stores you're growing, how you're doing all
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll be honest, I'm human, right? At some point, that gets me where it's like, okay, am I doing this wrong? Do I question myself? I think if have you read Unreasonable Hospitality?
No.
It's a book by Will Guidara. It's a phenomenal book. He talks about how every business is a hospitality business. So I come from a hospitality background, and how you treat everybody you work with is important, right? And so I don't want to take on anyone that I can't treat well,
Mm,
and that's from labor. There's a reason that we are still a one-person business. I still pack every bag we've ever sold because I want to be able to support folks if I do hire them. The same way that if I bring on a retail partner, retail is a really tough business. It's probably a lot harder than what I do, and there are probably 50 to 100 people every day for independent stores reaching out to them. So it's how do I make your life as easy as possible to support
hmm.
me to support you.
Yeah.
But that's not it's not always going to be smooth sailing. And so part of it is building that repeatable business, but part of it is building this unscalable piece that allows me to build that repeatable business, right?
Yeah.
And so that's
Hmm.
what those markets come in. That's where these random things that don't might be one-offs, but unfortunately, that's a reality to keep this business going if I'm not taking capital,
Yeah.
right? And so where we are right now is where resource constraint is that I am the resource, and so we're trying to figure out how to manage these things in a way where we can. So the goal for the rest of the year is just to build a bit of a cash buffer,
Mm,
so that in 2026 we can then double down and say, okay, now we have capital to allocate to whether that's hiring one person on a fractional basis or something, or to commit to these 10 stores and sink in capital up front, know that in 6 months we're going to get a return.
hmm.
So repeatable is important, but I think building repeatable is resource draining if there's nothing else to back it up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great point to make. That's a really great point. I want to dive into your financial strategy. You're talking about creating that cash buffer. I know that you also use a 90-day cash flow like plan as a core metric for your business. You know, I want to talk about that, like how you look at that. But let's go back sort of to the beginning of the business again, because you did get some initial funding. Can you talk about like how you went about that, what platforms you used, and what that looked like for Doosra?
Sure. So when I started, I knew that I had a little bit of saved capital that I could put into the business, but I didn't want that to be the only capital we went into the business with. And part of the ethos of what we do as a business is we care about the people we work with. So if I was going to raise any sort of capital, I wanted to be able to give back more to the folks who are helping me. So there's a platform called New Market. That's Numarket, and they predominantly support hospitality businesses, but it's a community crowdfunding platform. So, for example, if I had a campaign and you contributed $100 to it, you would get $120 to Doosra in credit spread over 6 months.
Nice.
So it would sort of vest, right? So it gave for me. I was thought, okay, I'm giving more to folks who are giving than they're giving to me. I keep them interested in the business for a course of 6 months, so they're brought in, and it gives me the upfront capital to be able to deploy. And that cost of 20% is something that I can deal with because
Hmm.
if we sell the product we want to, that margin will cover that delta. So that's how we started. And then after that, I then realized how capital intensive the business was and I said, okay, we need a little more liquidity. I could either put a bit more of my savings or I could find a way to float credit in a way that made sense.
Hmm.
So then I said, okay, let's look at 0% APR credit cards, right? Uh, in my personal life as well, we don't spend money we don't have, but that gave me cash flow buffers. And
Hmm.
so we ended up getting a first 0% APR credit card about a month after we launched, and that helped us cover the cash, the initial expenses, packaging, initial inventory, things along those lines. And my thought process was, can I find three of those? And can I then stagger them basically every 8 months? So I knew what they were. I applied for the first one when we started. When we got to the end of the first holiday season, I applied for the second one. So the next year we were covered for the first 8 months. And then we came to that call it September, October bit, I applied for the third one. So at each point, we had cost-free debt that I knew over a 12-month period, which is what the 0% APR period was, we could cover that.
Mm-hmm.
So that gave me a little of confidence and helped me sleep a little easier at night, knowing that we had working capital
Yeah.
to keep the business going.
Yeah.
And so that's how we did it. And again, I'm always on the lookout for cost-efficient debt capital because I'd much rather raise debt capital at this point. I had a bit of advice from someone a couple of years ago, and they said, if you're raising, think about equity and debt capital this way. If you're looking for capital expenditure and if you're looking to hire talent, go raise equity capital. But if you're doing anything from like a variable cost perspective that you can recover through selling product, go raise debt capital as long as that margin covers your cost of capital. And so that's the way that I'm operating the business. At this point, I've got no need for capital expenditure. I've got no need for labor. So equity is off the table.
Right.
And so we'll really focus on debt capital for as long as we can.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of the 0% APR credit card. A lot of people think that I'm like against debt. So I try to say as often as possible, like debt is a privilege. Like those of us who have access to debt, I love a line of credit from your bank. I love a 0% APR credit card. This is not an industry, a type of business that you can be in without being in debt, either to yourself or to someone else, right? I like to say it starts on day one because the business bank account doesn't open up with money magically in it, right? Someone has to put it in there. And the goal is to make enough money to be able to pay your debtors back, right? You included, and then some.
Yeah, and there are ways to get creative there. I think debt capital is one of them, and I do understand there's an asymmetry in information, but there are so many grants or small business programs that just for participating, it's a couple of $1,000s here, a couple of $1,000s there. And in the grand scheme of things, those are small numbers, but those help in that 90-day cycle, right? You're just trying to get to that next bit where the next PO comes through and the next thing comes through. And yes, in small businesses where there are not many people doing these things, that's time out of the founder's day. But I think keeping a pulse on those things here and there is important. And I believe a lot in serendipity. This is just my wife said I'm very much a dreamer, but the more you put yourself out there without the intention of getting something back, I think these opportunities, and you might not get, I've applied for so many things that I've just never gotten, but I've applied for so many things that I would have never known of if not for folks in this space. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think it takes time and effort, but that is good karma, and I believe in it. So
yeah, I used to work with a guy who we used to repeatedly say, "We're at work," and he would just say, "We're at work," because like people would get frustrated about having to do their work, and he's like, we're at work. Like this is what we're here to do. Like and that's sort of how I think about things like that. We were recently awarded an Amber grant. I had not. Thank you. I had not actively been a grant applicant, but our VP of Ops was like, Sarah, I think we should do this. Will you take some time to write it? And it's a couple of hours, but a couple of hours turns into 10K. Like it's pretty worth it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And to echo what you said, like people have asked, like, how did you get that grant? It's, I guess, a notoriously difficult grant to get because a lot of people apply for it. And I was like, I just was honest about what we're doing, why it's important, and like what we're going to do with the money. And so my recommendation is like, yeah, put yourself out there, tell people what you're doing. Don't worry too much about, what the grant readers are quote unquote looking for. Obviously take that into consideration, but then write it like purely from you and your point of view. And it's extremely helpful in advancing your business to be able to do what you want to do. Right. It's really incredible. When you talk about your cash flow these days, you said you use a 90-day cash flow planning or planner as like a core metric. Can you describe or like really kind of lay that out for some folks? Because there are people who listen to this podcast who are not projecting cash flow.
Okay.
yet. We want to get them
So
there.
I start basically with things that I know I have to pay regardless of whether we sell any product or not, right? So cost of storage, your services, your QuickBooks, things like that. So those are your
Mm-hmm.
base costs that you have to be able to cover. And then what I tend to look at is we have a very limited actuals database because we've been around for just under 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But the question always is, okay, based on last year, if I had to make the same, had to sell the same amount of product, how much does that cost in production cost and inventory cost? And if there's any ancillary costs along those lines, right? So let's just use a number. For example, last year in August, we sold, I think 1,000 units, right? We need to sell 1,000 units. Do I have that cash for August? What is the same number for September? What is the same number for October? Let's just use a number. If that number is $10,000, do I have the ability to access $10,000 today, right? And if I do, great, not a problem. We're good to go. So
Right.
between cost of capital, cash in the bank, receivables that are coming in over the next 30 to 60 days, and all our terms are net 30. So we have a good understanding there of when that cash is coming in. And then the second bit is, if I do not have that cash on hand and there is no AR, what do I need to go do so that in the next 60 to 90 days we will have cash?
Yeah.
Whether it is okay, then the next 3 weeks is just selling. Where I'm taking an event, I'm setting new meetings with stores, and I have an understanding of, okay, can I get to that cash? Thankfully, where we are right now, we've always had cash in the bank, or cash from sales, or receivables.
Right.
I also will acknowledge that our numbers are quite small, and so it's easy for us to have that flexibility in cash. But that's where the balance of credit and cash in bank, right? So even if I have cash on hand to clear all that debt, and if I have the ability to hold on to that cash, I will hold on to that cash first,
Yeah.
because I know I have the ability to pay that debt over a course of time. I know that's not as in depth and in detailed as putting it on an Excel sheet, but for me, it's always because of my former job. If I get into an Excel sheet, I'm getting into the weeds, and the getting into the weeds is time and effort and going down a rabbit hole that I can't afford to do. So for me, it's a very large back of the envelope, right? So this is the number I need to have based on what we did last year. This is the number I have in the bank. This is the number that I have in access to liquidity. This is the AR. So it's a
Right.
quick back of math. If that number ties up, I'm not looking at to tie up to the cents, but if it ties up to the hundreds of dollars, to the hundred, we're
Yeah.
okay. And
Yeah.
that allows me and gives me the freedom to then be able to go do what I need to do in order to get that.
Yeah.
That's how we look at it. So we compare actuals. We compare if there are events coming up. I know that is cash in hand up front with no terms. That
Right.
also gives me the buffer to do that. And we're breaking everything down to a unit cost perspective. I'll give you an example, right? We just got accepted to sell the Columbus Circle Holiday Market in December. The cost of doing that is $7,000. Big scary number. But if I break that down over the 30 days that we get to, that's $233 per day for rent,
Right.
right? And now I know, okay, on a day-to-day basis in that store, how much product I need to be able to move through to make sure that we've got net cash flow. And that's including, then I've got to add in labor. I've got to add in all those ancillary costs that it's easy to ignore and forget.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, someone's got to pay that cash.
Mm-hmm.
So it's getting granular when it comes to those things. When it comes to large numbers, breaking them down to a smaller number has been very, very helpful for me so that it doesn't seem overwhelming.
Yeah, I love that tip. I think too, something I'm keying in on here is with that 90-day cash planning, there's an element of forecasting, right? You got to know what's coming up, even if you're not 100% accurate, right? As you said, you're looking back to last year. You're saying, okay, we sold 1,000 units in August last year. You're building actively a repeatable, predictable business, right? So it's not unreasonable for you to say we're going to get 1,000 or 1,000 plus,
Yep.
something. And then what does it take to produce that? I just want people listening to hear like this is really critical work from the financial perspective and from the staying in business perspective. And I know that a lot of people get overwhelmed by it, but my hope is that there's like hearing you today say, this is how I look at it. These are the things that I consider. And they go and do a back of the napkin, to make those projections. I think when you look ahead, and I love the 90 days, and I think you don't have to look much further than 90 days, right? Like doing an annual forecast is crazy overwhelming. And that is like trying to predict the future so far out, right?
Yeah.
90 days. Do it in 90-day chunks, right? We look at our companies, a lot of companies quarterly, right? And sometimes we break it up seasonally, like where the quarter will be like November, December, January for some people, right? It's like just what makes sense.
Yeah.
I've got some summer businesses where it's like, oh my goodness, May is like the beginning of the year because
Mm-hmm.
May is like the beginning of the summer. And so we start really spending money in May. And so that's that's like Q1, like month one
Right.
of Q1, right? So think about your business in 3 months. I think it's increments. I think is a great idea. Choose the 3-month increments that make sense for how your business performs and operates. And don't worry about beyond that.
Yeah.
I love that advice.
The other reason that 90 days made sense is I remember the first event I went to after we launched Doosra, and we were speaking to a couple of financial advisors for CPG companies. What they told me was at a small CPG scale, if you go to a distributor, typically, if you're lucky, you'll get a 30-day term. If not, you get a 60-day term. You could end up with a 90-day term. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you end up with a 90-day term, can you survive till that paycheck, that
Yeah.
PO comes in? And so that's what the 90 days came from, is 13 weeks of cash flow, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Naturally, I'd like to be able to be liquid for more, but that sort of helped me say, okay, let's just start with that. If we can make that 90-day work, and then that's great. If not, we like to build a little more
Yeah.
flexibility.
The other piece of that I really like is that it's not just about seeing the numbers, but then there's an action that can happen as a result of that quick calculation, right? That you said, if we don't have enough to make it the 90 days, what's my shortfall?
Yep.
And then my focus becomes selling, to get the money that I need. I love looking at financial tools that way, as just that, tools for what is my next action? What is the thing that is of primary importance for us
Yeah.
right now, right?
I think you mentioned this in a podcast, I think a few weeks ago, when you're talking to the different statements that make sense, right? P&Ls are historicals, like okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's done, move on.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is that you need to be able to make decisions based on what is real,
Yep.
and I think that's what financial modeling really is, right? All you're trying to do is you're trying to make decisions. The historical numbers are accurate. Anything in the future could happen, might never happen,
Yep.
but it gives you this window to play with,
Yeah.
right? And you can then understand what you have. You have what could happen. You understand what your levers are that you can pull for different things,
Mm-hmm.
and they can be financial, they can be non-financial, and then just doubling down, right? If you've got a whole bunch of extra stock that you need to then recall from someone else and you can clear with a bulk purchasing company, great. That's cash
Yeah.
in hand that you can, sure, the margins are not great, but cash is more important to keep the
Yeah.
business going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something you said when we talked prior to starting the recording was that when you're growing a business like you are growing Doosra, which is sort of slow and steady, there is a tension between the cautiousness and sort of the aggressive growth, right? And can you talk a little bit about that and maybe how you handled that mentally or otherwise, so that other founders who are doing the same thing can maybe relate or learn something?
I think the biggest tension is that typically in my everyday life, I throw caution to the wind. But when it comes to this, I realize there's a bit of a greater responsibility, right? Not just to the people around me, but to the business that I've created and the customers who rely on it. And so for me, the tension comes when, we had this fancy food recently, and I had three larger retailers say this would be interesting. And in my heart, even though that's a nice thing to hear, I know we are not going to be able to do that for another
Right.
12 months at the very least. And that's still very hopeful. I think my focus always is, when I try to have this in between, is I keep thinking of what my customers,
Mm.
the customers I already have versus the customers I could get.
Okay.
And my greater obligation is to customers I already have, because I know they're already with me, and they've already made us part of their lives in some way, shape, or form. And so the decision calculus always is the upside that comes from a new customer or a new opportunity of being aggressive in this growth going to come at a downside to people who already trust us, right? And if there's a way for me to balance that risk, so let's give an example, right? If I have a 50 door chain come to me and say, we want to do this, and this is what's required from a cash, from a time, from a resource, from an inventory perspective, I need to then go do the math to say, based on what we know we can do to scale production, based on what we know we can do to secure a little more capital, will the 20 stores have helped me get here, will they be, will that service be diluted in any way?
Right.
If yes, I need to consider that new one. If no, then we can go ahead and do it. And I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I mean, I think you know this better than most folks, is like there's at the end of the day, there's some sort of resource constraint and understanding what that resource constraint is, right? So I don't have a good answer for you in terms of how I manage that tension because it's literally an everyday thing. But what grounds me is really how do I take care of the folks who've already supported us?
Yeah.
And if we can do that in a good way.
Yeah. And something I'm learning from you today in this example that you're giving, if a 50 chain store came to you, the other question that's popping up in my head is, do you have the resources to create the repeatability in those stores, right? To do the things based on history will produce the outcomes that you want. And likewise, can you continue investing those resources, demos, samples, et cetera, in the stores you already have? So it's like, if you've proven what's repeatable, is it still repeatable across the stores you have and the stores you want to bring on, right? Because I think that's a big part of it. When I see brands grow very quickly, something that tends to fall off is showing up in the stores, and then you've got to onboard your demo folks and things, and that's like a big expense, or it doesn't really happen in the time frames that it needs to, and so then you see the velocities suffer. So it's something I had never specifically thought of before in that way of like, once you've got repeatability, asking the question, can I maintain that in the
And
old and
I'll
the new stores?
And I'll be very honest, right? Even in the 50 stores we're in, I mean, we've probably been in 80 to 90 stores over the course of, I think, quite a few stores have dropped us, right? And that's okay because A, we're realizing that this is not the right fit. B,
Right.
we can't service them in a way that allows them to continue moving the product in a way that's beneficial for them, which is
Yeah.
also a learning. And then I have to make decisions on, do I want to then spend the effort with that store to keep pushing it because we're valuable for their customers and then we can be valuable to them, or it's just not a right fit and that's okay. You take the ego hit and then you keep moving.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, when that 50 chain, we're going to use the 50 chain for
Yeah.
50 tour for a reason. But if that comes, I need to be able to test in that first one. And so another part that informs that decision is the buyer on the other end understanding of what we can do and is willing to give us a time frame in order to demonstrate that we can build that repeatability,
Yeah.
right? Because that's also important. And then we can dedicate resources. But I think that buy-in is sort of required both ways. As much as I'm the person trying to impress the buyer, I need that buy-in from them as well.
Yeah. Transparency.
Yeah,
Right.
right. Exactly. I was like, we're all trying to win here.
Yeah.
And if we're not very, very honest with each other up front, it's just a poor relationship that's going to develop, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, so many, I think, really good takeaways from this conversation today. Kartik, thank you so much for all of your insights and just sharing how you're approaching business. I always say it's refreshing, to hear someone's unique take on how they're doing things. But I think the other interesting thing is like the way you're doing it is becoming more and more common. And hopefully, folks are coming to the podcast and able to, to hear these episodes more and more often so they can say, how do I want to grow my business? What is the right approach for me, for my family, right? For
yep.
the community that we want to support.
Two things that I think are very important to small businesses, especially folks who are doing it the way a lot of us are doing, which are undercapitalized, is support each other. I think something that's become a very big part of how I've grown. So you spoke to Keisha from Live Loud Foods, right? Keisha's a good friend. And there are so many of us who check in with each other because we're building businesses very similarly. We're in different categories, different approaches, different stories, but the everyday is quite similar in that most of us are solo founders and solo business runners.
Yeah.
Most of us are small and don't have the same capitalization that the big businesses have. Last year, I got into an event not because I applied for it, but because Keisha sent it my way, right? And then I ended up getting it. And so it's how do I help everybody else do this? because at some point we're building, most of the folks that we resonate with are building small niches that are either products that have a story to them, products that have a cultural relevance, products that are filling a small gap that could be quite niche, but sort of sharing that, I think, is again, it takes time and effort, but I think it's incredibly valuable. So I just hope more folks do that. Just, talk about either each other's businesses to everybody else. I think that really helps.
Yeah, I agree. That's amazing.
I think the other thing is it's okay. It's okay to question why you do this every day, and I think you need to, because even though it could be, a very scary loop, it'll help you affirm whether or not it's something you actually want to do.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, embrace the scary thoughts in your head. It'll help clarify the vision.
Yeah. Get a journal if you need it. Because when my
Yeah.
scary thoughts come, it's best to get them out on paper. I know not everybody is that way, but yeah, you hit those moments of you're like, I'm pretty sure nothing is going to work out. And I got to get that down on a notebook, and then I can usually, get myself back around, to no. I see the path forward. It's scary,
Yeah.
but we're gonna keep going. So
Yeah.
I love that advice.
None of those are business related, but if you're not functioning, the business is not. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's amazing advice. And what went through my head as you were talking about, brands supporting each other is our food industry is dominated by a very few conglomerates that own the majority of the food industry. And I know not everyone's goal is to have their business forever. And a lot of people do want to reach an exit. But I think that when brands have goals like you stated that you have for Doosra to be maybe a $10 million company who's supporting, maybe 10 employees and putting food on the table and taking care of them well, I think that that's a beautiful thing. And I also think it's a necessary thing. So we need brands whose objectives are not to get big and sell. As American consumers, and I'm no longer speaking as a financial advisor, like we want that. And so we also need to support you and shout you out and buy your product and vote with our dollars and our voices that we want you to maybe stay independent for lack of a better word, right? Not to not take investment, not to not have, share ownership, because those things are necessary in today's day and age. And I think it's naive to sit here and say, you could do it without any investment. Like that's wild, right? It can't be. But to say, do investment differently or do it on your terms, and, find the people who aren't explicitly saying I'm investing in people who are going to sell to Pepsi, or I'm investing in founder, you know what I mean? Like they're out there and it can be done. And I'm speaking on behalf of, people I think across the country, is that we want brands like yours to be around.
I know this is slightly off topic, but you saying that brought me to think of it. I know it's a bit of a pipe dream to have transparency in how everyone talks about everything, but I think there are so many small businesses who think that there's only one or two ways of doing things, right? But we hear about so many people talking about, oh, I bootstrapped this company to X things.
Right.
And I think there's a very real danger of using the word bootstrapped almost like a throwaway, because it's a difference being bootstrapped and being self-funded. There's a difference being having personal capital and saying, okay, I haven't needed to raise money and I can do all these things. So like I think it's very important to ask what is real, and not get blindsided by what you think is that's a underdog story until you look a little deeper.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And on that note, Kartik, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your story, and for being a supporter of the Good Food CFO podcast. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, Sarah. I appreciate it. Keep doing the good work.
Thank you.
Looking for more content like this? Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll see weekly podcast episodes as well as other content related to the show. Just visit youtube.com/@thegoodfoodcfo.
Thank you for joining us here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help good food founders find the show. We'll be back with a brand new episode in 2 weeks.